think is an atheist delusion. What I think is an atheist delusion is that it is possible to live ideologically purely in a way that does not rely on fundamental faith principles. When I say faith principles, I'm not going to make the claim that those faith principles are direct from Sinai or that those faith principles require the New Testament, for example. I'm going to make the claim that there are a bunch of principles upon which we base ourselves that are external to what we know about nature and evolutionary biology, and that many of the things that Alex does in his daily life, for example, are going to be things that rely on principles that are external to a philosophy that would assume a lack of the supernatural, a lack of the extra natural. So some of those principles, for example, are free will. So every day we get up, we believe, virtually all of us, whether we say we believe it or not, we actually act in ways that betray the idea that we believe that we have control over our own actions, at least to a certain extent, and that control makes a difference in the world. And that's what gives us purpose. It's what allows us to wake up in the morning and make the decision to do what we believe is right or what we believe is wrong. And the principles of right and wrong are external to evolutionary biology. So both of these principles that I've mentioned already, free will, right and wrong, these come from a language that is external to the Darwinian language of evolutionary biology. If you're talking about free will, there is nothing in nature that suggests the ability to make a decision free of environment and genetics in combination in some sort. The same thing is true of right and wrong. The idea that there is a right and there is a moral wrong that we can reason our way to. Another principle that I think that you're obviously very big on, is something that you rely on all the time. Your entire podcast is based on the idea of reason. These ideas do not exist in the context of a purely materialist atheist universe. Now, I'm not going to make the claim that I can prove that it's God who's behind those things, because one of the principles of faith belief is that I don't understand God. So for people who don't believe in God, that's an easy way out, right? That's an easy way out for people like me, because I say, well, I don't have to explain the relationship between God and free will because, frankly, I don't fully understand God. But that's not really the...
When do we know who won in New York City? I don't know. When do we figure that out?
That's not really an open window. That's just part of pretty much all faith systems. Is that if my mind were the mind of God, then I would either be God or God would not exist, one of the two things. So the idea that reason makes a difference in our lives, that we can reason our way to propositions, and that's more than just saying a few magic words and that's setting off a few neurons in somebody else's brain in a naturalistic way, that there actually is principles of truth, another concept that comes from the extra natural world, that these principles exist. So far I've mentioned free will, good, right and wrong, reason, and truth, right? All things that we consider extremely key in our daily lives and that Alex considers key in what he does. It's, I assume, why you get up every morning, or at least why you feel you get up every morning. You know, what gets you up to do your podcast? It's because you want to say things that you believe are reasonable, are going to convince people to act in a better way, or I assume not a worse way, that get people to change their lives in some way, in a self-motivated fashion. That's not merely in a sort of Pavlovian response to circumstance and environment. So if I were going to talk about the atheist delusion, that's what I would suggest is the delusion, that an atheist can use terminology that is drawn from a world that is external to atheism for itself. And again, that's not an argument for God even. That's just an argument against atheism. Again, I think the arguments against God are fairly compelling. And I think the arguments against atheism are fairly compelling. This is one of the things that I've said to Sam Harris. And I think that the difference is that most people who believe in God have expressed doubts, and a lot of people who are atheists tend to be more religious in this way than many of the people who are God believers.
Well, something's certain. We don't do cold opens or soft starts here on the big conversation. Alex.
Well, I am glad to begin on a point of agreement with you, Ben, that yes, if there is no God, there is no free will. But I think that's because of the truth of the latter of those statements. I suppose the biggest criticism that I made of you in a video response that I made to the atheist delusion, and this show does seem to have an extraordinary capacity for putting me face to face with people that I've been talking smack about online. So thanks again.
By the way, I should say it's a great video, and everybody should watch it if they haven't.
Well, I'm going to put that in the description. I think that glowing endorsement. The principal disagreement that I think I had with you, Ben, is that there was a subtle or not so subtle implication in my view that yes, with no God there's no free will, but somehow having God can solve this problem. I mean, you said a moment ago that you don't think you can establish God's existence through reason alone.
Why do you need God for there to be free will? Can somebody explain that? You can have immaterial sources of things that aren't God. There could be other immaterial things that you believe in, some spiritual well, I don't know, Buddhism, isn't that not spiritual? I don't know. But you could have like immaterial things that aren't, especially not the Christian God, right? There could be lots of other immaterial things that exist beyond God, no? Or something
But assuming that you do believe in the existence of free will, you think it's a real thing that you have.
Yes.
And simultaneously saying that if there is no God, then free will makes no sense.
Yes.
That does read to me like an argument for God's existence, such that in order to either say that there is free will, in order to say that there is free will, one must believe in God. And that does strike me as an argument for God's existence.
I mean, to slightly curve that, or to kind of stand off the rough edges there, I would say that the argument I made is an argument for something extra natural. Sure. Now, you can call that God or not God, but
okay. That's a better, stronger argument. Much stronger argument for Shapiro. Something immaterial. That's okay.
The thing that I'm making the argument for is that you cannot get from a materialist Darwinist universe to free will. That is not possible. So I know that the way you solve that is that you say that there is no free will.
That's right.
And what I'm saying to you is you don't act that way.
Just because you don't act that way, does that necessarily mean that a thing can't exist? I feel like there are contextual arguments for how you can deal with free will, but
I hear this all the time.
It is a difficult one, but
people say, look, you may say there's no free will, but you don't act as though that's the case. I suppose that
I don't think that's really an argument against free will, though, right? Because humans can believe in things that are irrational or aren't necessarily, or maybe they even know it's not true, that theoretically, I guess.
I'm just confused as to what it would look like for somebody to act as if they believe there was no free will. I mean, the very argument that there is no free will that I subscribe to, at least one of the various forms that it takes, is a sort of Schopenhauerian view that you can do as you will, you just can't will what you will, and that you are essentially just a biological machine reacting to its internal and evolutionary drives. That's what's happening. Now, call that nihilistic if you like, that's a separate question, but as to the question of how this would make one act, the idea that this might cause us to sort of lay around in bed all day or something, the very mechanism that I think is responsible for eliminating the possibility of free will, that is, the drives that make people do what they do, like I say, do exactly that.
That's a really good argument. I've never heard that before. I guess Alex does philosophy and everything more than politics. And Ben does, obviously. He's thought about this a little bit. Good job. Cute. Okay.
People do what they do. They make them get out of bed in the morning. Why do you get out of bed and go and make your breakfast if there's no free will? So you go and get breakfast because there's no free will and something is driving you to do that that's outside of your control.
For sure. So to get back to the nihilism point, which you kind of put aside, so that means that this conversation is essentially worthless in any sort of real sense. I mean, effectively, we were driven here by evolutionary biology and environment to have this conversation.
Can you re-summarize Alex's argument right there? Well, Alex is saying that when he argues for a lack of free will, the deterministic aspect isn't your mind thinking of how to do things. It is, but that's your mind thinking about a thing is sourced greater from like your internal neurochemical reactions that are happening in your brain that drives you to do things. So when somebody says, okay, well, if you don't believe in free will, then why don't you just lay around in bed all day? Well, the response can be, well, I don't believe in free will, so I would never lay around in bed all day. I've got biological mechanisms in my brain that drive me to do other things, for things that make me feel happy, like hedonistically, I can play video games, or in a fulfillment sense, I can go out and build a career and do something great in the world. I've got basic biological drives that drive me to go get food or whatever. Me going to do these things is just as much an argument in favor of causality or deterministic principles governing my behavior as they are an argument in favor of me, having free will. Like it can go either way.
Is watching this is driven by evolutionary biology and environment to have a particular reaction to that thing, and ever round the cycle goes. That seems like a very purposeless life. Maybe again, I'm drawing from a realm that is
purposeless. That's a whole separate concept, though.
Not evolutionarily biologically connected. The word purpose is really, teleology obviously has been taken out of the realm of science pretty thoroughly by atheists and by many people in the sciences, although I would argue that, again, most scientists speak in the realm of teleology literally all the time, and they're borrowing language from the language of teleology, even when they're describing functions of particular body parts, right? The heart pumps blood in order to keep you alive, right? They're constantly using language that's teleological in nature.
I don't know what he means when he says that. A telos of a thing is like the purpose of a thing. I think teleology, or the teleological arguments for God, I think imply like a purposeful function of a thing, like the earth was created for humans, although I don't think that's a teleological argument. That might be the cosmological argument. But like the telos of a thing is the purpose of a thing. But talking about functions of a thing doesn't necessarily have to be immaterial in nature, I think, right? Like you can say the function of a heart appears to be to pump blood, but that doesn't necessarily mean there has to be like some immaterial dictation that a heart has to pump blood. Like I think you can speak differently about these two things. To say you're borrowing from the language of religion, I don't know if I agree with that. Like religion came before everything, right? We all have religions before scientific exploration became a huge thing, before the age of enlightenment and rationality and the Industrial Revolution. So of course we're going to be using a lot of the same words and language.
The real question that
telos implies morality. Well, yeah, because I think the functions of a thing are normative to a religious person. Like the heart, like there is an ideal, morally good function or purpose, telos, to a particular thing. But I mean, like the words are going to be the same, but it doesn't necessarily denote the same type of thing, I think.
Pumps blood in order to keep you alive. Right? They're constantly using language that's teleological in nature. The real question that I have, and this is what goes to the question you were asking at the beginning, before there's a pre-question question, which was the good of religion to society. One of those goods is people believing that their free will matters, and this actually is a useful thing. So I believe that it is deeply important for people in society to believe that they have the capacity to change themselves and to make different decisions than what biology would drive them to. So you say, well,
that's a very backwards argument, though. We're saying that because it has a good function in society, this is a consequentialist argument, that therefore, if we're trying to argue for the truthfulness of a thing, I don't know if the usefulness of a thing has any application here, but maybe this is like a supercut where they're jumping around a bit.
Well, it's biology that drives you to get out of bed in the morning, which is almost Calvinist in sort of the way that it's described. Right? It's like you're predestined to get out of bed in the morning, so thus you get out of bed in the morning. But the reality is that we are constantly making decisions as though those decisions make a difference in the universe. And what social science actually does tend to show is that when people believe that they have control over their own actions, and when they believe that they're capable of changing the way that they live, they do make those changes with more alacrity and in better directions.
That doesn't necessarily make the thing true, though, right? Like sometimes if you're autistic, if you're talking to a girl and you think that this is a very common issue that people run into, girls and guys. You're talking to a girl or guy, and you're like, hey, like I really like you, I think we could date. And that person is like, listen, I think maybe we could in the future. I think it would be really good if you worked on yourself a ton. I think it would be really good if you like focus on yourself. sometimes people take that message to mean, oh my God, she's saying, or he's saying yes, as long as I work on myself, and then come back in a bit, when in reality, that's a rejection message. But just because you believe, like, you could be driven to better yourself or to do a good thing under a belief that's not true. So I don't think that that speaks to the truthfulness of an underlying belief either. But
and when they believe that they're capable of changing the way that they live, they do make those changes with more alacrity and in better directions than if they don't believe that. If people tend to believe in a deterministic universe, they do act worse. So it may work. This is going to be.
Is that even true? If people believe in a deterministic, like, has there been a fucking study done? Do most people even know what determinism means? I don't believe that. I don't know how you would even begin to measure that, or at least I don't believe there's any solid research on that. Maybe some questionnaires, but
directions than if they don't believe that. If people tend to believe in a deterministic universe, they do act worse. So it may work. This is going to be sort of Straussian in its implications, but that may work for you. You're a very high IQ individual who can somehow reconcile the idea of living a very purposeful life with the idea that actually there's no purpose to anything. But for the vast majority of people, that is not actually how they live. And I would suggest that even in your daily life, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, man, my biology is driving me this morning to get on the bike, have a great day, the sun is shining, that's my biology doing this. And I don't think that most people who live purposeful lives, even if they believe that everything they're doing is predetermined by the world around them, by their own biology, I don't believe they actually feel that. They have to engage in what they themselves would term an illusion in order to feel a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives.
I feel like you can flip this around, though, in other ways, although they're going to disagree on all forms of mental, or I don't know if Ben Shapiro would go as far as to say all forms of, like, mind-altering medication is bad for you. But if you believe that everything is just a choice you make, then obviously there are cases where you don't even have to say like ADHD or whatever, but maybe people with thyroid issues or metabolism issues might constantly think, if I just keep thinking I can lose weight, I know I can do it, when in reality, like their metabolism is actually fucked. Not like, oh, my metabolism, but like you actually have an issue relating to hormones of your body. And you can try to think your way out of that as much as you want, but the reality is you most likely never will. But there might be some way you can regulate a hormone that will help you think your way out of it. Or maybe we can go to the male example, since men are so much less likely to cut against their own medical opportunities, right? An older man can think his way to a boner as much as he wants, but if he has like some physiological thing that's inhibiting his ability to sport an erection, he needs Viagra, or like TRT for men who are low testosterone. You can think you're manly and try to lose weight and build muscle and all that all you want, but like there is no substitute for TRT if you want more testosterone. Would be the argument that I would flip this on.
Of course, but that's what the evolutionary process, in my view, in my worldview, I should say, has done so well, is provide precisely that illusion. I mean, it's not as though, you say, look, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, gosh, look at my biological...
My neurons are firing, yeah.
Of course not, because if I did, then the whole evolutionary purpose that this illusion serves would fall away. I mean, you say that this is a fairly purposeless life, and perhaps the implications that it's a bit of a depressing one. I didn't come here to inspire optimism in people. I just think it is in fact the case. It is in fact the case that free will doesn't exist, and we may feel very nihilistic towards that, but as a wise man once said, facts don't care about your feelings. And I will say that the argument against free will, in my view, is based upon something broader than just scientific analysis or empirical research. Rather, we can build an argument, I think, from a law of logic, the proposition that P must either be true or false, and it can't be both, it can't be neither. It has to be one or the other. Now, this law of the excluded middle, one of the foundational precepts of philosophy,
axiomatic truths.
We can simply ask a question of any kind of mental activity, and this will be regardless of whether it's material or immaterial. That's what makes this a crucial argument, and an important one, pertinent one, is that you can ask of that mental activity, is it determined or is it not? That is it determined by anything else, or is it completely undetermined by anything? If it's undetermined by anything, then it's random, and you're by definition not in control of that which is random. If it's determined by something, then it's either determined by something further inside your mind, or inside your brain, or indeed inside your soul, or it's determined by something external to your brain. If it's determined by something external to yourself, I should say yourself rather than your brain here to rid this conversation of any implicit materialism, exterior to yourself, if that's what's determining the action, then clearly you're not in ultimate control of that action. If it's something inside of yourself somewhere, then all you do is push the problem back, and you ask the question again, is that thing determined, or is it indeterminate? It's indeterminate, it's random, determined. You keep going back until you either terminate in something outside of the self, something or I suppose something undetermined and therefore random. Either.
This is why to get to free will, I think you have to do some very wacky things. You have to, I think, in order to establish free will, you have to go to an immaterial plane that like doesn't follow causality. I think both of those premises have to be true, because if you push it to an immaterial plane, but somebody else is still like tweaking things, like God is controlling you. I mean, you can't say you have free will then; it's just God controlling you. And if you, I think you have to push it to an immaterial plane. Oh, and it can't be an immaterial plane that's like your soul, but it's still like a causal chain. Like you would choose this because of this, because of that, because that's something that goes, like you have to break causality somehow. It's like, I feel like free will is just not computable with the human brain. I just don't think it makes sense. I don't think we have a way to understand intuitively like non-causal chains. I think we have to, like, causality is the way that we're a priori granted with our brain working that way, is my understanding of it.
of which you are completely out of control in. If you say that it terminates in something like a soul, people like to do this. They say, well, look, with a religious philosophy, we have the benefit of introducing a soul. That doesn't solve anything.
Exactly, because how, is the soul, is it random? If it's random, that's not free will. If the soul pushes things to an immaterial plane that still follows the rules of causality, I mean, that's not free will. And if it pushes it to an immaterial plane where God is just tweaking it, then that's not free will.
Because you still need to, it's not a matter of having to explain the mechanism by which the soul brings about actions. That may well be a mystery.
It's just whether or not it's causal or non-causal. And I don't even know what is it's like causal, controlled by something else, or random. What other options are there? Like it's a non-computable thing. I don't even think I could speak meaningfully about it. Maybe philosophers can, or maybe there is some other term or some other thing that I'm unaware of, but yeah.
But if it is the case that whatever it is that's doing that is either determined or it's not, and that if it's not, it's random and therefore out of your control, and that if it is, it ultimately terminates in something outside of yourself or something random, and both of which are out of your control, free will cannot exist.
Well,
what is the Ben Shapiro response to this? I'm so curious. Is there a response to this?
So that argument does rely on the complete deconstruction of the self.
No.
And you're using the term self in this argument in, I think, a couple of different ways. You're saying something outside yourself, but then you're breaking down the self into a bunch of separate components as though the self is a computer. Right? As though if you took the self and you broke it down into a machine, and there's like the microchip, and you've got the processor, you've got all these different parts of it. So it has to be coming from here, or it has to be coming from here. But I think the very idea that we have of ourselves as selves is as a deciding being. And so the attempt to carve that down into, so which parts of
self-ID as a deciding being is how you get self-ID for trans people. That's an incredibly unsatisfactory answer. Is I have free will because I've decided I have free will.
The deciding being, that is an avoidance strategy. So I don't think that the argument quite holds.
Well, if we can call the self just a deciding being,
call it a deciding being,
then that sort of fundamental assumption that we make about the nature of the self, I don't think is going to be incompatible with atheism.
How so?
Because we're talking about what the self is here. I mean, atheists believe in the self. Everybody believes in the self.
Well, no, that's not. I mean, that I find difficult to believe. Why would an atheist believe in the self? The self is a series of non-deciding mechanisms.
Non-deciding mechanisms in the self. You can have like abstraction or emergent things that come from, like the conscious experience can be emergent from underlying physical properties of the brain that don't require a spiritual or God thing, right?
You described.
Fuck, this is going to cut off before this argument ends.
I see that your view of the self is an atheist view of the self, a meatball wandering through space, as I've put it somewhat colorfully. The sort of Spinoza idea that you're a stone that's been thrown, and you can comprehend that you've been thrown, but you're a stone that's been thrown, and that's just the way that it is. Why would there be in atheist philosophy such a thing as a deciding self? The deciding being, is external to the idea of an evolutionary cause, because the very word deciding suggests uncaused decision-making, and you've just excluded it through your own philosophy.
Uncaused decision-making.
There's a lot of language games being played here. I don't mean that negatively, like they're trying to obfuscate, but like one thing I always used to say, like as when I shed my Catholicism, and I feel like this is kind of a really baseline rejection of a lot of free will thought, is like, you look at people around you, isn't it odd, that you're Christian in a country that's like 90% Christian? Like, what are the chances of that? Notice how the religions aren't evenly distributed all over the world? Or isn't it odd that you happen to believe that slavery is wrong in a time period where we've outlawed slavery? Or isn't it odd that you think that women should be able to vote, or that masturbating is okay, or that watching anime is acceptable in a time period where all of these, like, it's crazy how influential the environment is around you. Yet we still speak of decisions as though we're making meaningful decisions. But clearly, these are not decisions made in like a random machine where every possible outcome is, has an equivalent chance of happening. Now, you don't necessarily have to say every possible outcome has the equivalent chance of happening for there to be free will, right? Because you could say you have free will, but you could choose to walk into a wall of knives or not. And just because nobody walks into the wall of knives wouldn't mean that it's deterministic. It's not necessarily like a dispositive argument that completely could. But I mean, like, all that to say that
in atheist philosophy, such a thing as a deciding self, the deciding being.
When somebody says the term decision, I don't think you have to carry all of the baggage of free will along with that to be able to speak of that. I don't think that's fair to say.
Is external to the idea of an evolutionary cause, because the very word deciding suggests uncaused decision-making. And you've just excluded it through your own philosophy.
Uncaused decision-making, I suppose, is a concept that I think is unintelligible. And therefore, if there is an unintelligibility of the self on atheism, I suppose the thrust of the criticism that I made to essentially every point you made in that video, except for the argument from...
Fuck, I watch Alex O'Connor. I'm not shitting on him, but But I feel like his political commentary is very, how would you say, like, not ripe. It's like uncooked. It's like, I feel like I could think a lot more about it. He is way more coherent, doing like philosophy, I guess, related stuff.
Motion is that what you're saying to me, if it applies to atheism, I think simultaneously applies to theism as well.
How so?
An uncaused decision. I mean, what is the process by which a decision is made?
But now you're falling into the same sort of argument that I excluded at the beginning, which was I said that the beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand.
Which is not fair, but...
So I can't explain to you how the uncaused self makes decisions.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheist
But you have a
framework.
burden and I don't. Meaning that...
Why would Alex have the burden here?
I think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean...
You had a talk with Pacman recently. Did you watch it? I didn't, but I saw a subreddit talking about it. But it sounds like in the subreddit they complain about the same thing, that Pacman basically just kind of like goes on, and Alex doesn't have too much to kind of push back on or say, because Alex just doesn't do politics especially.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheist
But you have a
framework.
burden and I don't. Meaning that...
I don't think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean, the simple fact is that you are the one who's claiming that a reasonable materialist universe is the cause of all. And so if that's the case, you do have to explain the mechanism in a way that I certainly do not.
I feel like his thing needs less bootstrapping than your thing, right? Yours requires a whole fucking god that supposedly has a book, especially as you're making a claim about a particular religion. Because Ben is not just religious, he's Jewish. He's making a claim that a particular religious belief is correct. I feel like the burden is much stronger for him. Although maybe he's just broadly, he's not arguing for his personal view. He's just speaking broadly about atheism versus some religiosity, or just free will even more broadly maybe.
My entire philosophy rests on the positing of an entire realm of things I don't understand.
So what you just said in chat is, in my opinion, this is why free will, as humans understand it, has to exist. Destiny, if everything is caused, how do you hold people responsible for their actions? There's a common rebuttal to people who reject the existence of free will. Yeah, so I think this is kind of where, be careful, I have not read anything formal in this area, so take everything I say with lots of grains of salt. I think this is why compatibilism exists, is because I feel like a reasonable person will look at the world and be like, okay, well, clearly there's some kind of deterministic thing going on here. We can't, especially if you're an atheist, like, do you really believe your mind is some special machine that can make decisions, without being fully reliant on antecedent causes? It's unique from every other thing in the universe. Okay, well, so then it must be fully determined. But then how do we speak of like moral responsibility? Because morality, moral agency, is agency. It relies on the idea that a person could choose otherwise. Otherwise, how do you hold somebody accountable for any wrong ever? We don't blame the tree for falling on a person and killing them any more than we blame a 1-year-old for throwing a rock, at another 1-year-old. But we do hold accountable people that have reached a certain age where we said you can make decisions now. So if you don't believe in free will and you're fully determined, how do you have things like punishment? Or how do you even speak of morality in society? So you can't. And I feel like that's where compatibilists come in. And my feeling is, maybe there's more fleshed out compatibilist answer. It feels like what compatibilists say is they say, okay, well, listen, sure, everything is like fully determined, but we can speak differently of like you choosing to do something because of a whole list of antecedent causes versus you choosing to do something because a guy's holding a gun to your head. We can speak meaningfully about two different types of decisions. So that's how we're going to make determinism compatible with moral agency. We're just going to say that we're going to kind of like agree to believe in this delusion of choice, because some choices seem to be meaningfully different than other choices. That's what it feels like. But I'm sure there are much better defenses of a compatibilistic thought that tries to make compatible, ethics with a determined outlook of the universe.
And in terms of their interaction with the world. Now, as I said at the very beginning, that leaves me a giant escape hatch. I'm not going to pretend that that's not a giant escape hatch. It acts in practice as a giant escape hatch. It also tends to act as a fundamental principle of faith, right? Again, in every moral realm, right? When we get to the problem of good and evil, right? One of the big questions is, well, how can God allow evil to take place in the world? And the fundamental religious answer, as it has been for thousands of years, is my mind is not God's, which is a giant escape hatch. It also happens to be true from a religious point of view.
Cringe. Real quick, or I'm not saying it's cringe, but this was a good movie. I don't care what anybody says. People hate on Sunshine way too much. That was a good movie, period. And fuck the haters, okay? Destiny, in the deterministic worldview, punishment is necessary as a deterrent. That's fine, and you can say that, but as humans, we don't intuitively feel that way. And as humans, we want to see people punished for bad behavior and rewarded for good behavior. We do think differently of people. We don't think that people who are being punished are merely people that are being deterred from future bad behavior, or merely people serving as examples for other people to be deterred from bad behavior. We think that people who do wrong and are punished for it are worse people than people that do good and are rewarded for it. Like we view these things as being quite different.